Right, Holly, welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for joining me this morning. I'm really excited for our conversation. We've been able to touch base offline. I have had the opportunity to learn a little bit about your story, but I'm hoping to learn more and also share with the listeners. But before we dive right into it, I do want to give you an opportunity to share with the listeners a little bit about yourself, what's brought you here, what you're doing now, and I'm sure we'll be able to explore quite a bit more as we get into it.
Thanks so much for having me. And yeah, I'm excited to be here and excited to connect with your listeners. And again, I'm Holly Bertone, and I'm a certified holistic health coach. And I work with women in midlife for the big three that really plague us in terms of weight gain, energy loss, and insomnia. But what
Mhm.
I found is that it's really looking at it from a place of what I like to call a comeback story. And that's why I just think it's fun to think about it from the perspective of the 80s movies that we grew up with and that 80s movie montage, and really creating a comeback from that place of not any kind of big adverse event or life challenge. It's really just the day to day that just
Mhm.
drives us, just wears us down every single day. And that's why I like to think about from the perspective of a comeback story. And I actually got my start at the FBI as the
Mhm.
chief of staff for counterintelligence. And a lot of people were like, okay, how does that connection even happen? How do you go from one to the other? And it really goes back to when I was about 10 years old.
Mhm.
And one of my favorite things to do as a kid was I loved to do jigsaw puzzles. And it wasn't just one, like one's hard enough. And I would take 2 or 3 thousand piece puzzles, dump them out on this huge dining room table. And I dump them out, mix them up, and then put them back together.
Mhm.
And that's exactly what I did at the FBI. And looking at clues from a data analytics perspective, from a trend analysis perspective. And that's exactly what I do as a certified holistic health coach is we have so many clues, and often from our past. And I know we can get into
Yeah.
that because I know that's your specialty. And there's so many clues that have helped us to get to this place. It's just we live in a society where things are really noisy, and we're
Mhm.
not in the quiet to be able to listen to those clues and to be able to put those pieces back together so that when we are in that state of being so disconnected from ourself, to help them to be in the quiet to put those pieces back together. So
Mhm.
that's the through line.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and you're correct. In fact, as far as how things are so noisy, this morning I was going. I typically Sunday mornings or Saturday mornings I'll go for a cold plunge just to let my body heal from what I put it through during the week. And I had music playing in the car, so I try not to listen to music first thing in the morning. So I'm trying to put on a podcast, and I'm like, couldn't get it connected to my car, and I'm like, okay, why can't I just drive in silence? And as I was driving in silence, there's just thoughts coming in, and I'm at the stoplight, and I'm like, wow, is my head ever noisy? And it's just we're just so consumed by the noise. And it was interesting for me to just first thing in the morning pay attention to that and make that intention of trying to work through that noise as I'm going to go into the cold water and sit there, because the only thing I can really do in that moment is focus on my breath. But yeah, that noise aspect is huge. And as far as the comeback stories go, I know you mentioned Rocky, and we're talking about movies from the 80s. Why has the Rocky movie really resonated with you in terms of that comeback story? What is it about Rocky that you're able to connect with?
And I think it goes back to the very first Rocky episode. It was
Hmm.
1976, I believe.
Hmm.
And he was just it was one of the original comeback movies. And he was just this just average guy. And he ended up going into the world championship with Apollo Creed. And
Hmm.
he went 15 rounds with Apollo Creed. But what most people forget, because the movie was so long ago, we think about Rocky, we think about running up the stairs, we think about singing
Hmm.
the songs. I was actually in Philadelphia earlier this year, And my friend and I, we ran up the stairs, and it was so cute watching little kids whose parents weren't even born when the
Hmm.
Rocky movie was made. And they're singing the song and they're having fun. I was like, this is what we remember. Yeah, this is what we think it's about. And we forget that Rocky actually lost the fight. He went
Hmm.
15 rounds with Apollo Creed and he actually lost. But no one would ever call Rocky a loser. Like
Hmm.
he was a winner because of who he became during this challenge. And I think it goes back to the original the hero's journey. We love that comeback. We love to cheer for the underdog. And I think what we forget is that we're that underdog sometimes. We've lost a lot of that self-value. We've lost a lot of that confidence. Like we've just had so many years of life just beating us down day after day. And we talked about the noise, like life being so noisy and beating us down and
Hmm.
becoming so disconnected, to be able to rise up from that and realize that we really do have that superpower inside of us. So that's why I love the movie, because it it really is that place of, we all thought that he won, but he
Hmm.
lost, but he actually won.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think those small losses can give us meaning, and there's something to be said about that humility you get from those losses, because otherwise, if you were to win right away in life or in general, you wouldn't appreciate all the work you have had to put in to get to the point of victory. And as you said, in the hero's journey, I think there is that aspect of finding meaning through your experiences, as much as as difficult as they can be in the moment. And we tend to lose sight of it, right? Because not only are we overcoming that adversity, we're learning so much about ourselves. And I think for me, when I look back on some of those difficult moments, I appreciate the resiliency I've been able to build, but also take meaning from how I've had to overcome some of those challenges. And everyone's experience is different, and we all go through it in different ways, and our struggles are different. But also trying to understand, you said your focus is on the big three, especially with women. Why have you been able to then focus on just those three things? What made you come to that conclusion that those are the three things that need the most emphasis?
Yeah. And let me just say first, we were talking about adversity. So
Hmm.
back in 2010, I was 39 years old and I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And I
Hmm.
went through surgery, chemo, radiation. And then 1 year later was diagnosed with Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is an autoimmune condition. And between the two, just experienced after that years of debilitating chronic fatigue. So my world was trying to maintain a very successful career while being very sick.
Hmm.
And in 2017, I was actually forced to resign from my dream job at the FBI and really was very sick. And I overcame that. I learned after, it took me years to figure out how to heal myself because the medical profession failed me, my doctors failed me, and I just figured it out on my own. But what I realized was that everyone talks about nutrition and diet and lifestyle, and that is very important. It's extremely important. But there's a
Hmm.
lot of components, there's a lot of mindset pieces that kind of traditional mainstream health practitioners don't talk about. And that's the mindset component. That's really focusing on and dealing with our past, with that level of forgiveness, with coming to peace with what got us here.
Hmm.
And that's a big piece of what I focus on because, like I said, so many people just focus on the doing. And I
Hmm.
like to call it the it's the doing is important, but it's also about the youing.
Hmm.
And fast forward, coming into midlife, and when I was a competitive athlete, I was 110 pounds. And I thought that health meant that I was 110 pounds, that I was thin, and that I was a competitive athlete, that I could race in a mountain bike race and then stand on a podium and get a medal around my neck. And I thought that I was the epitome of health. And I
Hmm.
realized it's not the case because probably 95% of my diet was ultra processed foods.
Hmm.
And I was living this burned out, stressed out, adrenaline junkie lifestyle. And it caught up to me pretty quick.
Yeah.
After that, realizing that health does not equal weight. It's not about the number on the scale. It's more about other factors that make up what a healthy lifestyle should be.
Hmm.
But when we get to this place of midlife, that scale is typically not our friend
Mm.
because our body shifts and we think about it from the perspective of even if our weight has stayed the same, our body's shifting. And it's almost like we're feeling it's like that level of kind of frumpiness and it's just our appearance changes and it's just that confidence kind of drops. And what it is, it's not just about the weight, but then we're also operating from that place of being disconnected. We have
Hmm.
chased the career. We're, in a successful career. We've chased getting the perfect spouse. And now our marriage is maybe average at best. We've chased
Hmm.
having the kids and having the big, beautiful house. And now it just consumes us. It takes every single hour of our day to do the things that we told us would make us happy, but we don't have that level of happiness. We now are resentful because we have all of these things, but they're just demanding everything from us. So at the
Hmm.
end of the day, we've got nothing left. Our battery is just absolutely drained.
Hmm.
And then we get to bed, talk about the noise. We're absolutely exhausted. We go to bed and then we're laying there, and our mind is just the monkey mind takes over. We're
Hmm.
replaying the events from the day. We're worrying about all the stuff that has to get done tomorrow that we didn't get done today. We jump on our phone, we start scrolling on social media or whatever, and then our sleep is just absolutely atrocious. And
Hmm.
those are the big three. Those are the three that a lot of midlife women complain about, and they're all interconnected because you
Mm.
don't get a good night's sleep. Guess what? You wake up, you're probably not going to want to work out, right? You're probably going to eat more comfort foods. You're probably not going to want to stick to your nutritious lifestyle. And it's just one big cycle, which is then your energy is going to drop and then you're going to eat more and then you're going to sleep worse. And they're all interconnected.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you expanding on that. And I think you touched on that feeling healthy versus looking healthy, right? And I did an episode earlier, I think it was a couple of days ago, but that's exactly what we talked about is often we get attached to how things look on the outside. Meanwhile, on the inside, it may not be connected. We're talking about you look at the scale, weight's good, you look healthy, but do you actually feel healthy? And to me, that then comes back to our thoughts and feelings about ourselves and how are we internalizing all of that in our mind, right? So that's the mindset piece. Have you been able to then, from your own experience, differentiate between the two, right? So you said you were doing everything physically, everything looked good on the outside, but maybe when you dig below the surface, you see that on the inside, things aren't quite as well. And that's where a lot of these issues then start coming through, right? And then a lot of the times people experience, unfortunately, they experience autoimmune issues or health issues. And I know you've shared some of the stuff you were going through specifically at a very young age. How were you able to then connect the two?
I think it was from the perspective of when I talked
Hmm.
about everything being so disconnected.
Hmm.
And I like to say, come back home to you.
Hmm.
My program's actually called Back to You because that's really getting to that place of connecting back with yourself. And when I realized that my health was getting better, I was able to heal myself, but I didn't have that vibrant health.
Hmm.
I was almost 50 years old and I was still feeling just frumpy and gross and the scale wasn't ideal, but it was still
Hmm.
within a healthy weight. And I'm like, something is missing. And my dad's in a retirement community and he's independent. He's all over the place. And he's got some neighbors that are just these tiny little women and they're in their 80s. And one goes deer hunting and kayaking, and the other one's just like this little Mennonite lady, and she's like all over the place. And the other one just volunteers. And I'm like, that's what's missing.
Hmm.
They're in their 80s and they have this vibrant health about them. And I'm missing that. And I'm not even
Hmm.
50 yet.
Hmm.
Something needs to change. And that's when I realized that there were so many things external to me that were so disconnected.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that was coming back to myself. Unfortunately, a side effect of that 2 years ago was a divorce,
Mm-hmm.
and not ideal, but under the circumstances, allowed me to be in that place where I really could find that inner peace and that inner confidence and that inner validation rather
Mm-hmm.
than looking to all of those external factors.
Yeah, and I can connect with that too and relate to it that for me, what really started my journey was a divorce. And it took me, even after the separation, it took me, I'd say, a good 2 to 3 years to finally start connecting with myself. But I know I was disconnected with myself. And then I took the 2 to 3 years, as I mentioned, to figure things out. There's a lot of chaos and noise in my life. So it took me a while to finally get to that point. Now, part of society, it's interesting, right? There's that, and because I've struggled with this, so I want to put this question forward to you as well. Is there's that shame around divorce, and then if there's children involved or just family and friends involved in general, there can be that perspective that you're being selfish. But I think we often get caught up in that too. And one of the ways I was able to practically look at this whole experience was I'm not being the best me that I can be. And because of that, I'm not serving the people around me, especially myself too. So I need to find that person. I need to connect with myself. And that's something I've been able to go back to. And as much as there's shame and guilt, I'm still confident in my choice, knowing that it's allowed me to become a way better version of myself and something I take pride in. But there is that you can tend to look back and have that doubt, or you may second guess yourself saying, okay, did I make the choice for the right reasons? Or is this just something that was too difficult and I just decided to bail? So how do you, like, for yourself, reconcile all that and balance it out in terms of the internal dialogue?
I like to think of this as two sides of the same coin. And
Mm-hmm.
I experienced this. I know my clients experience this, and I'm sure your listeners are going to be able to relate to this too. Is that
Mm-hmm.
we have the piece of the coin that drains our energy, and I talked about it. We have maybe a career,
Mm-hmm.
spouse, kids, house, like all of these things that we were told is supposed to make us happy. And I
Mm-hmm.
was in a place where I was giving everything to all of those things. And it was just sapping my energy. It just completely drained. And what I realized, and it's just like that subtle flip of that coin, is
Mm-hmm.
that you can have all of these things and they can lift you up rather than cause you to drain that energy. And that's really what that was, that subtle flip of the coin.
Mm-hmm.
And again, unfortunately, this was a divorce, just it had to happen, but it gave me the space to be in that quiet, to really understand what what that alignment really is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's easy to go down these paths that we are supposed to go down, that society tells us to, or family pressures, or just
Mm-hmm.
the way we grew up and this is how it's supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I just kicked all of them to the curb. And it
Mm-hmm.
was after the divorce a period of being very selfish because I needed to be. And I
Mm-hmm.
needed a lot of time in the quiet. I needed a lot of time to heal. And in that healing, I also came to a lot of reconciliation. We talked about kind of failure and adversity
Mm-hmm.
and looking at all of these lessons from the perspective of I could either perceive them as a failure, I could either perceive myself as a failure, or I can use them as the stepping stones to build that resistance, to build that resilience, to really grow
Mm-hmm.
that resilience and to grow that fortitude and that grit. And to say, okay, the next time something happens, it's not as hard because I've done the hard things. And I hate to say it, being a stereotypical middle aged woman at 52 years old, I feel like I've been through 15 rounds with Apollo Creed, with the breast cancer, the autoimmune, the divorce, the empty nester, all of these things. My mother passed away. I was She lived 2 hours away and back and forth in her ailing years. And, all of these things that we go through in midlife. And it's really a chance to just take a step back and say, it doesn't have to be this way. And I'm
Mm,
not saying go get divorced. What I'm saying is it doesn't have to be this way. How can I change? And it starts with me, it starts
mhm,
inside. How can I change first? It isn't about changing your external world, it's about changing your internal world.
mhm.
And that's where I started. That's where I end up. That's where it is. And once you change that internal world, the external world all of a sudden looks a lot different.
Yeah, no, I can totally relate to almost everything you're saying. I agree with you. I think sometimes for us to change, we have to change our environment. And that's a constant journey too. I've come to realize because as I've worked through a lot of this, you have friends along your journey, and sometimes you're not serving each other. And then you have to figure that out as well. And it doesn't always have to be divorce, it can be your social circle as well. And we have to constantly be evaluating that. And it doesn't mean that you say, oh, I'm better than them or they're better than me. It's just sometimes you just aren't on the same path, and that's okay. And I think that's tough for a lot of people to navigate, but that's part of the growth I've been able to reflect on for myself. Now, you talked about the through line between your career in the FBI and the holistic health work you're doing now. Let's maybe start with some of the stressors and perhaps even the trauma that was involved in the work you were doing within the FBI, and how was that impacting your health? I know you've touched on it a little bit, but as far as your cancer diagnosis and some of the other health challenges you were having, was it mainly due to the trauma, or as we've talked about earlier, there's other stuff from the past that, once we start reflecting, we start seeing, okay, there's these patterns that have been going on for a while, and that's how it's affecting my health.
And I don't think it's one specific thing. I think these diagnoses happen over time. When you look at things like cancer, autoimmune, diabetes, heart disease, the big
Mm-hmm.
four, it's end stage inflammation. It's being in that place where you haven't taken care of your body, mind, and spirit,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's not like I thought that cancer just fell out of the sky and it was my unlucky day. I didn't realize that there's all these different factors that go into it. So I definitely think when I was younger, I was bullied a lot as a kid. I think that was a big factor. I was in a mountain bike accident. That's potentially a trauma. Growing up with a lot of a farming community, a lot of pesticides, growing up with a lot of sugar and ultra processed foods. That was pretty much my only diet. And
Mm-hmm.
living this adrenaline junkie lifestyle. The FBI's very headquarters, especially a very stressful place, very driven. And I think all of those factors combined
Mm-hmm.
were created the perfect storm. And it's one of those where after the cancer diagnosis, I didn't slow down. I didn't realize that this is my chance
Mm-hmm.
to heal and to do things differently. So after my cancer diagnosis, I kept up my high achievement lifestyle. I
Mm-hmm.
kept up my ultra processed sugarholic lifestyle
Mm-hmm.
and the autoimmune disease. And then that my body was literally screaming for attention and I wasn't listening until it
Mm-hmm.
finally just shut down.
And then what was it like after the shutting down? What were the changes you made, and how did your health improve from there on?
I started with nutrition and lifestyle, which I think
Mm.
again, this is about the doing,
Yes.
and it moved the needle a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
but I kept saying I felt like my body was stuck, and
Mm-hmm.
there was just something stuck. Like I just wasn't like you're supposed to move. It's supposed to be free flowing. And what I started to do was I actually did some energy work and
Mm-hmm.
released a lot of that trauma from the past. And I also worked with a chiropractor. And I think between the two, And the more I dove into the forgiveness of the past and releasing of the past,
Mhm.
the more I opened up that space to
Mm.
heal. And
Mhm.
it is such a big piece of the healing journey. And I know you're a huge proponent of that as well. And I just
Mhm.
think it's so overlooked. I think we live in this society where we, want the microwave food in 30 seconds. We're not watching commercials on TV anymore. We go to our phones, we have everything within 2 seconds. We have the entire world in 2 seconds on our phones.
Mhm. Mhm.
And we want that quick fix. And
Mhm.
the healing is not about the quick fix. Weight loss is not about the quick fix. As we age, when you turn 50, you have greater risk of things like heart disease and cancer and diabetes and autoimmune diseases and thyroid issues. And it's for a reason, because we haven't taken care of our health,
Mhm.
and everything builds up over time. But yeah, the biggest needle mover for me was really to be in that place of the silence, be in that place of the healing, being in that place of forgiveness. And the more
Mhm.
I go there, and it's not even just, and I know you're going to get this, it's not even just forgiveness for my past and everything that got me here, even from a generational perspective.
Mhm.
And going back, we carry generational trauma, whether we know it or not, and going back and healing that as well. And again, this has to be done in the quiet. Like you can't do it while you're watching TV with your laptop doing work and scrolling on your phone at the same time. It's never going to happen.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think that quick fix mentality is really affecting us. I often think about even just Amazon, right? You make an order, and if it's not arriving within a day, you're losing your mind. What's going on? And I do agree with you. You have to be able to sit in silence and find that solitude. And I think people often have this misconception that loneliness versus alone, they can't decipher between the two. And I think being alone is something that's so important, and I had to figure that out myself, and that really helped with my healing journey. Was able to sit, whether it was in meditation, at home by myself, journaling, being out in nature, whatever it was. There was so much that was coming at me, and I had to work through that healing. And I'm a huge proponent of anything that's worth doing, and that's, you want something to be sustainable, you have to put in that time and effort. And there's so many analogies we can use, but I often use the one with try to put on muscle. It takes time, right? And
Yeah.
it doesn't mean you need to have like you need to look a certain way. If you're trying to build that strength, you need to put in that time and effort and the consistency. And I look at healing the same way. And it's not something you do and it's over. I think for many people, myself included, that healing aspect is an ongoing journey. And there's constantly
Absolutely.
stuff coming up that I'm working through and healing. And that's really helped me. And it sounds like that's something you had to do as well. And that's where what we talk about, and you touched on it yourself, was the mind and body. And you said often people aren't prioritizing those two things as well as the spirit. So I want to understand for you, how were you then able to prioritize the spirit, and what does that look like for you? Because everyone has their own way of going about it, but just curious for yourself.
To me, and I connect in the morning. The second I wake up, I just spend time in the quiet. And that's the most important part of my day. And I connect to myself, I connect to source, I connect to God, I connect to the universe. And I just say, thank you for the light. Thank you for your light that guides me today, and help me to be the light to everyone who I touch. And I really just sit in that energy and that frequency until I feel like I'm ready. And then my
Mm-hmm.
next 30 minutes is in straight meditation. And I've got a bunch of different guided meditations that are downloaded, so I don't have to turn my phone on. The wireless, I can do it without it. And so that's the next. So the first probably 45 minutes, I don't even get out of bed. I just stay in bed and just really center myself, because I know between as a health coach and running my podcast and speaking, and it's the days get busy. The days get
Yeah.
really busy really quick. And that really helps to center my day The
Mm-hmm.
other thing that I do is I like to do some writing at the beginning of the day. And I write from a place of future gratitude. And I know a lot of people talk about like the morning notes and things like that. And I write about my day as if it already happened. So this is first thing in the morning, and I write about the day as if it was the best day ever, and just
Mm-hmm.
saying my gratitudes for everything that happened. So I'm already going into my day as if it's the best day ever, as if I've already been given all of the gifts, as if
Mm-hmm.
they're already mine. And I think that also helps to frame things in a different perspective. And if I have time, it's not every day, but if I have time in the middle of the day. I actually, back to the jigsaw puzzles, I actually have a
Yeah.
card table. So just one this time, though. I only have a little table. And so I'll do a puzzle and I'll put a meditation on. So it's an active meditation or it's an
Mm-hmm.
energy clearing or something like that. So over lunchtime, if I have time, I'll like to spend 30 minutes, 45 minutes doing that just to reconnect myself for the afternoon, because I think that's so important to have that connection, especially because you go and you go and you go those busy days.
Yeah.
And like right now, I'm standing on a grounding mat. I'm grounded to the, even though I'm physically inside and in my recording studio, I'm grounded to the earth. And then at
Mm-hmm.
night before I go to bed, I'll do a shorter meditation, maybe 10, 15 minutes before I go to sleep. And I think that is the consistent practice, and especially with what I do and how many people that I connect with, is to really protect my energy throughout the day and to have those consistent practices throughout the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And you've touched on the gratitude, and I think that's something we don't really put a lot of emphasis on, and it's so important. It's really helped me as well because you're almost shifting your perspective on life. Whereas before, I would often pick out the negative and then just ruminate on that. But the gratitude allowed me to find those little things that I wasn't giving much attention to. And I try to practice that with my clients too, because they come in and they're often feeling resentment or bitterness towards life in general. It's okay. How can you find those little things that we take for granted? And it's so important. But the other thing I'm hearing from you is intentionality. And that's also very crucial. And I don't think many people, again, have that focus on being intentional. So, what I'm hearing from you is you're being very intentional about how you're starting your day, how you expect the day to go. Uh, Maybe expect is not the right word, but how you want to live your day, right? And then again, throughout the day, you're very intentional about how you're connecting with yourself. And that's something I also try to practice is setting some intentions on who do I want to show up as in this
Yeah.
world. And then at the end of the day, I'll try to do a bit of an audit. How well did I perform to that? And how can I take those lessons and try again the next day? So that intentionality is very huge. Is that something you're mindful of, or is that just something that's come up for you and it's something you've just been practicing?
Absolutely. It's equal parts what I call the doing and the youing. And I think in order to, I think also we get stuck, right? Like we just
Mhm.
get stuck. We get frozen. There's so much information coming in. You know, what are we supposed to listen to? How are we supposed to know? How are we supposed to know what action to take? And especially when it comes to our health, and everyone's screaming different things on the internet. Carnivore's best. No, vegan's best. No, this is best. No,
Mhm.
this is best. I was like, how am I supposed to know
Yeah.
what to listen to? Spoiler alert, you're supposed to listen to yourself. Like you have that inner wisdom inside. So part of it is the doing, is the action. It's not being afraid to take those steps and do the action. And then the other half of it is the youing. It's really coming back home to you and connecting with yourself. And the other thing that I like to say is that the world is not going to come crashing down
Hmm.
if you say yes to yourself,
Right.
but you will eventually crash if you don't.
Hmm.
And that's where I was however many years ago now, 14 years ago. And that's where I see so many of my clients. I know they're just minutes away from that crash. And to be that pattern interrupt, to come in to say, hey, I don't want you to go down that same path that I went down. But I also think for me to work with my clients, and I know you too as a coach, like you need to be in that space where you hold yourself pure so that you can hold their potential as pure.
Hmm.
And I think people look to us as coaches for that reason, because I know when I first started down my path, like I didn't believe in myself. I didn't think I could do anything. Like I just, my self-worth was in the toilet, and I just was like, oh my God, my health was in the toilet. Everything was, I was literally at rock bottom. And I'm like, how do I even take that first step? And that
Hmm.
was working with a coach who believed in me before I could believe in myself. And I've taken that with me, but in order to hold that space for my clients, I need to be in that pure space myself.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the things I've really focused on is being able to meet the clients where they are, but then also giving them, because majority of the times when people are coming in for therapy, they have never been seen or heard or understood. And it's the impact is so profound when they finally get that feeling. So that's where meeting the clients where they are is huge. But to your point, I think I have to be fully grounded myself, because how can I guide someone through the therapy session if I'm not connected to myself?
Yeah.
Because otherwise, there's going to be all this counter transference taking place, and that can be very difficult for the person on the other end. Now, you also touched on paying attention to what's going on inside or listening to yourself. But again, we've touched on this idea of there being so much noise. And when there's so much noise, it's hard to discern that voice inside, that inner wisdom. And I think for me, like I said, being comfortable in that space of solitude has really been profound. But for people that have never really done that, how are you helping them, or what type of guidance are you providing so they're able to get into that space? And slowly, what I've come to realize is the more you pay attention to that voice, the louder it gets. And because of the conditioning we get early in life, we tend to just shut that voice down. And I still recognize it. Like sometimes I'll get this really significant feeling inside, this energy shift when something doesn't feel right. And I'll just shut it down from time to time. Like, oh no, because I feel bad for saying no to someone or just coming across as the bad person. But I'm not serving myself, and I have to constantly recalibrate that. And then again, I feel whole in alignment because I've been able to listen to that voice. Sometimes it takes time.
Yeah, and I actually have quite a few different exercises and meditations and just exercises that I walk my clients through in my program. I like to call them, instead of tools in a toolbox, I like to call them crayons in the crayon box, because it's
Hmm.
really just about coloring with a different color, just picking a different crayon and coloring with a different color. So I'm not going to get into all of the details of
Yeah.
everything that I do, but I could go through one exercise that is one of my personal favorites. And that is when you have one of these big, colorful emotions that you're experiencing, is I actually treat it like a visitor to my home. Pretend like it rings the doorbell. So for me, anxiety is always my biggest one. Let's just go with anxiety. So it rings the doorbell. And I've got a pug. He's 4 years old. He's crazy. His name is Hannibal, and I thought that would be hilarious to name a pug
Yeah.
Hannibal. Yeah. So anyway, so like I literally just pretend that anxiety's ringing the doorbell, and if I'm physically at home and able, I will physically do the action. Otherwise, I just do it in my mind. So I open up the door, watch the dog run around, and say, "Please take off your shoes, come inside." And ask if it wants something to drink or anything. We go into the living room. Here's, feel free to put your feet up, and we have a conversation. I literally pretend, and again, if I'm physically able to, I will physically sit in the chair and physically have a conversation in my mind with anxiety. If not, I just do the whole pretend in my mind. But we literally have a conversation. And I was like, "What are you here for? I
Hmm.
appreciate you coming to visit. Why are you here? What are the lessons that I can learn from having you in my home today?" And what it does is it's not just an awareness of what's going on, but you're welcoming this emotion. We're human. We have these
Hmm.
emotions for a reason, right? These emotions aren't to punish us. These emotions are to teach us. And it is, when we're in them, we are having a real human experience. And
Hmm.
when we can have that chance to communicate with them, it allows us to remove ourselves from being so entrenched into that emotion. It gives us a lot of neutrality and to be able to just, and it's a little fun, have a little pretend conversation with a pretend emotion. And what happens so often, not just with me, but with my clients, is we come out of this. In fact, I literally just did this the other night in the middle of the night. I woke up with some crazy anxiety for whatever reason, and I walked through this exact exercise. And I literally had so many epiphanies just open up, and I literally went right back to sleep. And,
Mm,
with my clients too, they're like, wow, this is so profound to be able to just listen, to have that conversation and listen to what that emotion is telling you. And
mhm,
then to just say, hey, thank you for visiting, right? You're welcome in my home and thank you for visiting. We're done. Conversation's over. I appreciate you visiting. Here's the door.
yeah,
And when you can approach it from that perspective, and again, this is just one of the exercises that I teach, but when you can approach it from that perspective, it really helps to not just calm your nervous system, but to give you a deeper appreciation of those emotions, those big, colorful emotions that make us human, right? But not just that, but to say, okay, what am I learning from this? How can I grow from this? And the answer on the other side, it's just so profound. But again, back to the quiet, like we have to be in the quiet to get that answer. I'll give you another example, similar and different. I was doing a meditation and I was working on my puzzle and I was doing an active meditation. And it was on a very specific problem that I was trying to overcome. And I was in a deep level of frustration.
mhm,
And normally I don't say, show me a sign or anything like that. Like I just have this knowingness that when I come out of meditation or quiet time or whatever, I'm going to have the answer. So I don't worry about that. But this specific one, I was like, I want a sign to know that I'm on the right path. So I finished my meditation and it was a Saturday afternoon. I was like, I'm done with work and done with my play stuff. I'm going to go turn on TV. I
mhm,
had been watching Charlie's Angels, like old school from the
yeah,
1970s. And I turned on Charlie's Angels. Within 2 minutes, there was my answer in that episode, as clear could be.
mm,
Now, here's why this is important is that how often when we turn on the TV, do we get on our phones or we're on our laptop or all three,
mhm,
right? And our minds are all over the place and we're not paying attention to anything because we've got multiple screens in front of us.
yeah,
If I would have turned on the TV and gotten on my phone to play Sudoku or something, I would have totally missed the answer that was right in front of me. And
mhm,
when we're in that quiet, when we have that time to connect with ourselves, to connect with our emotions, we have those answers. We just don't know how to look for them. We don't realize that everything in life is a breadcrumb to get us to the next place.
mhm.
And that's why this work is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I appreciate you sharing all that. And again, I think the idea here is to be open to receiving without judgment, without shame, and just having acceptance for it all. And I think that's where those answers come. And sometimes they don't make a lot of sense. Sometimes they don't have to be fully developed, and it takes time for us to go on that path. And to your point, follow the breadcrumb trail, and then you slowly start getting to the answer. But at the end of the day, you have to be open to it and receptive to it because all the messages are there. And everything we've been touching on is to minimize the noise so you can start receiving some of those answers or guidance. I look at it more as guidance because, again, it's showing me where I need to go. And sometimes you'll walk off the path and then you have to come back, or you may take a detour, whatever it is. But that's the whole beauty of the journey. And that's how we all grow and learn. So I really appreciate everything you've shared, Holly. This has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing your story as well. Now, for listeners that do want to find your work, or if they wanted to get a hold of you, what are some ways they can do that?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you again for having me on the show. And yeah, for your listeners, 3 easy ways to find me. And I think while you're listening to this podcast, the natural next step would be to head over to Your Midlife Comeback Story, which is my podcast. And yeah, just start at the top and pick your favorite episode that resonates the most with you.
Mhm.
And also, if you're a woman in midlife and you're really struggling with the big three, with the weight loss or with the weight gain, with the energy loss, and with the sleep, I have a private podcast training series that we do a deep dive into those three. And you can go to it's podcastholly.com. That's podcastholly.com to get free access to that. And then I hang out on Instagram at holly.bertone. So come say hello there.
Awesome. We'll put all of that in the show note captions. But thank you again, Holly. This was a great discussion, and I really hope the listeners are able to draw some of their own wisdom from it. And it doesn't have to be always the same, but that's the beauty of it, right? Hearing other people's stories and how you are able to interpret it in terms of what works for you.